FCC Commissioner Mignon Clyburn. Commissioner Clyburn is certainly no stranger to CCA, and as many of you know her over the years, but it is a true pleasure to have her join us again at CCA at a CCA event. And the Commissioner is a longtime champion of competitive wireless issues, and she's a highly valued friend at the FCC. And I think it's really no exaggeration to say that her work to ensure that rural America has access to high-speed broadband is appreciated by all CCA members. She also is a great speaker. She proved that yesterday when she was the first commissioner to ever address our associate member committee. And I hope all of you enjoyed the opportunity to meet the commissioner yesterday afternoon on the floor. Like I say, she is a great speaker, and which makes it even more exciting and pleasing that we can welcome her back today. So ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you a true champion of competition, Commissioner Clyburn. Commissioner Clyburn.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you so very much. Speech, if you just hesitate a little before you leave.
I will hesitate a little before I leave. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It is great to be here. Now, Steve just gave me a little build-up. Hopefully, I will be able to live up to at least half of that. Well, thank you. As we near the end of Women's History Month, in typical Mignon fashion, there is a Mignon fashion, I decided to celebrate in part by exhausting my terrific staff and accepting as many calendar engagements as possible. So naturally, returning to CCA and catching up with your distinguished team and reconnecting with all of you was going to be on my preferred list. So I thank you, Steve, for the invitation and for that most generous introduction. No doubt, I am not the first at this show to refer to the collegiate basketball finals, but allow me to do that with just a little twist. The fact that this show is taking place in Las Vegas at the same time as the NCAA men's and women's finals, even though Carolina didn't quite make it. We were in the Elite Eight, though, and we won last year. But all of this is symbolic. Just as many here are known to accept long odds, the challenges CCA and its members face in the commercial wireless market can also be daunting. In the NCAA, players from little-known, often under-resourced sports programs take center stage against well-established basketball powerhouses, creating the most level playing field in sports. Much like those players from smaller institutions, you do not want referees on the field of competition to make the rules of the game more difficult for you, simply because some of you lack a national brand name or deep pockets enjoyed by more established players. As CCA member companies know, advocating for policies and initiatives that help to address the interests of all consumers has always been a top priority for me, with a key eye on communities that face unique challenges when it comes to access to robust, affordable communication services. Competition remains one of the best ways to address those challenges. Getting there means we must adopt and enforce rules that give CCA members a fair shot at competing with your larger counterparts. Restoring interoperability in the lower 700 megahertz band, mobility funds that incentivize deployment of mobile broadband to rural and underserved areas, targeted and smart lifeline reforms that enable low-income families to have mobile broadband service, rules that promote data roaming agreements, spectrum aggregation limits for the world's first ever incentive auction, pro-competition policies for the next generation of wireless services or 5G, and calling on the FCC to take a careful and detailed analytical approach to reviewing license transfer applications, and prior to issuing its annual reports about the state of competition in the mobile wireless industry. All of that and more is how we get there. There are two reasons I would like to provide a bit more detail about the interoperability and mobility fund phase 2 proceedings this morning. The first is that both proceedings were important to bringing service to unserved and underserved rural areas. They both took several years to be resolved, and they both are good examples of the tireless advocacy undertaken by CCA and its members. The second reason is that in both cases, we could not have reached pro-competitive and pro-consumer results without a collaborative, voluntary industry solution. With regard to the lack of interoperability in the 700 megahertz band, back in 2011, this association, at the time known, do you remember? The Rural Carriers Association, remember back then? Approached me about the technical problem you were facing in deploying valuable spectrum won in the 2008 auction. Since the very beginning of commercial mobile wireless services, the Commission had either mandated or expected that spectrum allocated or auctioned for these services would be interoperable across each allocated band. In 2009, 3GPP, an industry setting body, made interoperability in the lower 700 megahertz impossible. This meant that the valuable beachfront spectrum smaller wireless companies acquired for millions of dollars at auction to compete against larger companies could not be deployed. Steve and his advocacy team frequently met with me and my colleagues. But despite their persistence, their pleas did not seem to be gaining much traction. Clearly, part of the reason was that there was a reluctance to get involved with industry standards, but the more I thought about this dilemma, the more I realized that this unprecedented development in the 700 megahertz band was greatly harming rural communities by providing them the investment, innovation, and job creation that deployment of this spectrum promised and could provide. Toward the end of 2011, an opportunity presented itself to unlock the regulatory doors at the FCC, and yes, we took it. The Commission was considering an application to approve AT&T's acquisition of Qualcomm spectrum in the 700 megahertz band, and as you remember, one of the issues raised in that transaction was, you remember, interoperability. Based on my request, Chairman Janikowski agreed to initiate a rulemaking proceeding on interoperability starting in the spring of 2012. And although it was my hope that we could wrap up that proceeding and adopt rules by the end of that year, that was not to be. Serving as acting chairwoman from May through October of 2013 gave me an incredible opportunity to direct staff to work with you and the large nationwide carriers to craft a voluntary industry solution. But I realized that if we mandated rules outright, one of the nationwide carriers would just go to court, and not only would we risk the rules being overturned, the possible years leading up to a legal decision would be expensive and contentious. So we started by holding a meeting between all relevant stakeholders that turned out to be about 30 different entities. We listened carefully to everyone, looked for common ground, and held, yes, even more meetings. By September of 2013, AT&T agreed to an approach that would resolve the problem by 2015. Interoperable smartphones actually arrived a year earlier than expected, and this resulted in a win-win situation for consumers, smaller wireless companies, large companies, and yes, regulators. While it took 4+ years to resolve, that is a short period of time compared to the effort it has taken to hold a Mobility Fund Phase 2 auction. That proceeding, which the Commission first proposed in its 2011 Connect America Fund reform order is ongoing. For many of us, going without that smartphone, tablet, or access to the internet for any length of time is a temporary inconvenience. But what many do not realize is that millions of Americans still wish they had a temporary inconvenience because they lack full-time access to any mobile broadband service. This is why I have been an outspoken supporter of a mobility fund that provides ongoing support for companies like CCA members who understand, you understood well before this commission did, the importance of mobile broadband in areas where service would be unavailable absent federal support. Last year, we ultimately voted on a Phase 2 budget of $4.53 billion in support over the next 10 years to primarily rural areas nationwide, excluding Alaska, that lack unsubsidized 4G long-term evolution service. This substantial support is necessary because although the universal service budget for fixed services exceeds the budget for mobile services, more Americans have access to mobile coverage than have access to residential fixed broadband. And we would not have finally arrived at that important decision to go forward with the mobility phase fund phase 2 auction had it not been for your advocacy. That continued advocacy to ensure that there not be a disruptive flash cut of legacy support for wireless carriers for securing a challenge process as a part of the mobility phase 2 auction should not be taken for granted, because the challenge process, while I know Steve mentioned that, and I'm not going to challenge him on his assessment, is important to provide the data the FCC uses to make critical policy decisions. Importantly, in August of 2017, we adopted an industry consensus proposal to undertake a new one-time data collection on deployment of 4G LTE to prepare for this auction. This was a watershed decision because the lack of good data prolongs the time it takes to deliver on the Mobility Fund's stated objective on bringing connectivity to under and unserved communities. And we have restructured an admittedly complex process to minimize the burdens on challengers, including small providers who just want to bring connectivity to more communities. And until the Commission holds the Mobility Fund auction, I will remain vigilant of claims of inaccurate data. I make that promise to you today because I believe that the lessons we have learned in the interoperability and Mobility Fund proceedings should also be applied to at least one more rulemaking, the Commission's Lifeline proceeding. The rule changes that this Commission proposed late last year threaten, for the first time in the program's history, our goal to make modern essential communication services available and affordable for low-income Americans, veterans, seniors, and others. For example, the proposal to limit Lifeline subsidies to only consumers receiving service from facilities-based service providers, I believe, would be particularly harmful. Wireless resellers provide service to 70% of citizens who are eligible for the monthly Lifeline subsidy. So if that proposed rule and others go into effect, they would have a devastating impact on millions who rely on wireless resellers whose low rates, together with a $9.25 per month subsidy, is the only way those families can afford wireless services. But the good news, and there is good news, is that the vast majority of the commercial wireless industry came together to raise concerns about those proposals. With regard to excluding wireless resellers, one commenter eloquently put it this way: everyone from AARP to Verizon opposes this proposal. The industry also criticized the proposals to implement a maximum discount level and to oppose an $820 million per year cap on the Lifeline program. I hope that the commercial wireless industry can also collaborate to propose voluntary solutions that can address any legitimate concerns with the Lifeline program without the devastating punitive effect that the current proposal by the FCC's majority would have on low-income communities. As with interoperability in the lower 700 megahertz band and the Mobility Fund Phase 2, industry consensus will be vital to ensuring all communities have access to mobile broadband services. And at the end of the day, that is what we all want. So I want to thank you once again for the invitation. I want to thank you for allowing me to present these remarks. I want to thank you for serving your communities. You have my ongoing commitment to remain a partner in this effort to promote competition and robust, affordable communication services for all Americans, because at the end of the day, that's what we all want. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so very much, Commissioner. It's always good to hear from you, and it's a pretty impressive list of accomplishments you listed there, all of which we are grateful for.
Thank you. With your help.
If
most things are possible.
If you don't mind, if you take just a moment and let us share some special recognition for not only all your good work and hard work for competitive carriers, but what you've done for across America to bring broadband services and actually bring the equity factor into play on all these issues. So
thank you.
See, is Lucy? Here we go. just a little token of appreciation.
Thank you.
And thank you, Lucy. Excuse me, getting it. And I'd like to say that no one deserves this more. I think you heard today just a small list of all the great work she has done. It's an absolute pleasure for me to present to you CCA's Hall of Fame Award.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so very much. As I said, her work has benefited not only our industry, but every consumer across America. They will be better served because of your service, and we thank you so very much for your hard work, and we're always in your corner, and I hope good things will remain with you forever.
Well, better days are ahead for me, and we know with good policy, better days are ahead for you. So thank you. I wish for you what I wish for myself. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I said anything. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Wow, great lady. Thank you so much. All right, let's move to our next speaker.